Welcome back, everybody, to the Tuesday night version of Getting Defensive, brought to you by Gridiron Ratings. I am your host, Kraig. With me, as always, we have James and Gary, and tonight we're going to be talking 2022 Dynasty Edge Rusher rankings. But before we get into that, we're off for a little bit week last week. James, how'd the week off go, and how are things going for you overall?
Week offs is nice, but at the same time, after that week goes by, you're like, kind of wanted to get back into this. So, I'm pretty excited to talk about these edge rushers, and things are overall pretty good. I work in tax, so tax season's kind of hitting and taking a big chunk of my time. But once April 15th rolls around, I'm sitting pretty, and I'm ready to devote way too much time to fantasy football. So I'm almost there.
Sweet.
Gary, have your taxes filed yet?
No, I don't think so. I'll let her take care of that.
Yeah. How you doing anyway?
I'm doing pretty good, man. Ready for this combine coming up here in the next couple of days, and we're going to be on again Thursday with Jeff, and he's got a pre-combine or the start of the combine reports on rookies he wants to do, and yeah, just rolling. Hey, we're going to be live tomorrow too, doing an IDP dime drop with our newest writer, IDP writer at Gridiron Ratings, Brandon Jackson. Looking forward to doing that.
You're getting ready to drop everybody and move everybody up in their rankings appropriately based on 40 times only, right, Gary?
Exactly. Dead on.
Especially these edge rushers, which, again, that's going to be our topic here tonight, and I'm going to be showing you guys the list that we have here. So the edge position is sort of getting new here in fantasy football. Some sites have a designated position for it. Some don't. There isn't a whole lot of continuity with anything new, of course. But, we're going to be looking into what we are calling an edge rusher, and I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that. Mainly what I've been seeing is they're sort of grouping those 4-3 defensive ends, if you want to talk about like a base defense. And then they're also looking at those 3-4 outside linebackers. Is that what you guys have seen too?
Yes. Yep.
Pretty much.
Yep.
All right. And some sites, again, have this, some don't. Some have the sort of that combo where you can play them as a defensive end, outside linebacker, depending on, your league positionality. Like we like to stress, know your league, know everything that you need to. So this may not apply to you. But as we have up on the screen there, we have our lists. And before we dive too deep into those, James, are you mainly looking at these sort of guys? The list kind of indicates that, but when you have a balanced or big play league, like would this change if this was just a tackle heavy league?
Yeah, when it's tackle heavy, it's going to just slot up to those guys who get more tackles than everyone else and aren't as big play productive. Generally speaking, this list is more balanced than anything else. If anything, leaning a little bit towards big plays, because honestly, that's where, leagues are trending. And the way they really should trend is to have the guys who are valuable in real life be the guys who are valuable in fantasy. So those big sacks, those fumbles, those turnovers, that should be paying your fantasy bills. So yeah, that's kind of how I built this. If it was tackle heavy, I'd adjust it. But if you're just looking at this and not really looking anywhere else, you're not exactly going to, misfire badly because this is what you went in a tackle heavy league. It's just not the most ideal.
Gary, are these sort of the guys, when you look at this list, by and large, it is sort of those defensive ends. Is that sort of what you're seeing just in terms of production when you're looking at this for the past couple of years, that mainly the edge guys that are productive outside of the freak TJ Watt, those high-end defensive ends that you're looking for?
Yeah, well, TJ Watt's actually an outside linebacker in the 3-4. So
I said he's the exception, sort of. To
right.
End.
Yeah, overall, I prefer some of the up and coming outside linebackers like TJ Watt in this, but you still got to give due respect to your, your defensive ends, like Myles Garrett and such. If this was more of a tackle heavy format, then in this particular list, I would probably have the outside linebackers up even higher. But we were looking at this at more of a balanced or perhaps if we had a sacklet heavy league, this would probably apply to that.
Do you guys have any leagues that you're in that have a designated position just called edge for these players?
I didn't last year.
Yeah, I
And
didn't either. There's definitely leagues where, it's kind of you want to use more edge guys as opposed to tackle heavy linebackers because of how
Mhm.
valuable the, big plays are. But specifically the designation of edge, I'm not in any leagues like that. And I would like to get into one, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah, we're hoping to really see it catch on. It's been under discussion amongst some of the fantasy sites on the Twitter community, and they've had a lot of requests. So some conversations have been done. Off the top of my head, I didn't play him last year because I moved over to Sleeper, the tipster leagues. But ESPN actually had, I believe, an edge rusher designation, and they have for a long time, and it's one of the reasons I used to use them. I believe that I was told possibly Fantrax did, or maybe it was Yahoo, but don't quote me on that. I don't play on either one of those leagues. I just remember the conversation. There's just not a lot of them out there. Hopefully soon there will be.
I have 2 leagues, including my super deep league that I've mentioned here before, that are on Flea Flicker, and they do have a designated edge position. So 2 of my main leagues basically
Right.
are on there for whatever reason. The
Well,
commissioner put them over there, and
on
they have
Sleeper,
a position.
go ahead. I apologize. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. I was just saying that's the only one that I'm in because I haven't seen it on Sleeper, MFL, and the one I was in like Yahoo last year. The league wasn't set up that way, so I couldn't tell you whether or not it was an option or not.
Right. Well, Sleeper did some things last year that basically these guys, if you chose to do it, would be dual designated, so they could play the outside linebackers like T.J. Watt, Michael Parsons, Reddick, Barrett. They would be able to be played as a DL position too. So in that dual designation. So I mean, this would definitely, I would think, off the top, Sleeper fans should like this for that dual designation reason.
Well, getting into our list, I'm going to read these off again for those of you listening along, and we're going to start digging into these a little bit. Gary has T.J. Watt, Micah Parsons, Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, Hassan Reddick, Shaq Barrett, Harold Landry, Joey Bosa, Chase Young, Brian Burns, DeMarcus Lawrence, and Danielle Hunter. I have T.J. Watt, Chase Young, Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, Danielle Hunter, Brian Burns, Joey Bosa, Harold Landry, Max Crosby, Josh Allen, Jalen Phillips, and Greg Rousseau. And then James has T.J. Watt, Micah Parsons, Myles Garrett, Chase Young, Nick Bosa, Joey Bosa, Harold Landry, Josh Allen, Brian Burns, DeForest Buckner, Sam Hubbard, and Danielle Hunter. So right off the bat, and I think it is, to me, obvious, and it feels that way to you guys too from your lists, there is kind of a consensus one edge rusher with what TJ Watt has been producing over the past couple seasons. And I don't know if you guys want to add anything, but I don't really have anything to add beyond that.
Yeah, there's not really anything to really touch up on. It's, he's the real clear 1-1, I think, kind of in any sort of balanced format, just overall, not even down at just defensive line or edge or even linebacker or DB. He is your guy. You can't not buy that production, and until it stops showing up, it's easy.
Yeah, he gets it by stability, consistency over a few years here. He's just a facto defaulto.
Well, we'll move on, and you both have the same guy next, and I, the Cowboys fan, do not have him on here at all. So in the leagues, again, that I'm in, Micah Parsons didn't have sort of that edge availability based on how he was set up last year. For the current changes, they don't have it for him again. But do you guys think that that's something we might see based on how, when they had those issues along their defensive line, Dallas used him? Do you think that he'll sort of have that dual positionality possibly, and that's why we have him on here?
Gary, I fully expect him to be in the same role he was last year, and I think that he'll qualify more as an edge rusher. So I put him on there for good measure because if he remains as an edge rusher and eventually starts getting that designation, then it's kind of hard to beat that. We might be having the conversation in another year or two. Who's number one, T.J. Watt or Michael Parsons? As long as he remains an edge rusher in the NFL.
Yeah, kind of dittoing Gary, but also obviously based on our previous one where we went with inside linebackers, I kind of predicted Parson moving in. So why do I have him as an edge rusher? I think he should gain eligibility. Now we're kind of diving into will a website decide a guy does or doesn't have eligibility, and that's something I have no insight into. I don't know exactly what Sleeper or My Fantasy League or any of these other websites are going to do in terms of their designation. But in terms of my list, I've designated him as an edge rusher. So he shows up very high because I believe even if he remains as an edge rusher, as opposed to moving inside, he is a guy. He is a top guy. And I want him wherever he's at. So yeah, he fits there. I don't know if necessarily he'll qualify in every single league, but I'm going to put out my rankings under the assumption that he does.
We call it the top 10, but we all put out 12 just to see who's outside that top 10. So, this is early on. If Michael Parsons does move into the inside linebacker, basically take his name off the list and slide everybody up. It's not, it's not like deep thought, record-breaking rankings this early in the season. Things are going to materialize as we go through. Some changes may happen. We might come back in 3 months and this list is totally different. It's just based off of free agency and possible draft picks. Who knows?
Well, the number 3 guy, similar to the number 1 guy, we all have the same, which it's kind of rare for these lists if you've seen, although, we have a couple other things close here. Myles Garrett for the Cleveland Browns. Just turned 26 years old, so certainly his youth on the side and had crazy production. James, you're a Browns fan, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to give you the first chance to talk about Myles Garrett and why he cracked your top 3 here.
I mean, frankly, I feel like I have him too low. Parsons is, all about upside and growth and production that's going to continue, whereas Garrett is just quietly an extremely steady monster. Yeah, there's T.J. Watt exists. So when you compare him to T.J. Watt, he looks like a little bit of a poor version of that. But really, the T.J. Watt is a gigantic exception in our game, and he is the most consistent player outside of Watt. And I just don't really, see him as a name who everyone's jumping on this year. I think last year, he was kind of still an up-and-comer when you look at him from a youth perspective. But now I think that's going to shift over, maybe even to stick with the Bosas, going to be all about Chase Young. I think Myles Garrett is just going to quietly be an extremely solid pick, but there's not going to be anything real sexy about him because, the pundits have talked about him for quite some time. He's just continuing to produce, and it's kind of a move along type name. And I don't think that he should at all be forgotten because, we all think that he's a top 3 player. I can't imagine anyone has him outside of their top 5. He's just insanely consistent. And when we were talking about this past season, it was so hard to find consistency. So I'm all about rostering Myles Garrett. And, if you are in an auction type format and you can just pony up and get Watt and Garrett, I think that's an excellent strategy. And I'm all about that as opposed to ponying up and getting some DBs or some linebackers. I think investing at the edge position is the way to go if you're going to invest early.
Oh, yeah. The scarcity of the edge position and the amount of players that are in it, they definitely take a higher priority and at a balanced format. Myles Garrett easily could have been a number 2, but like I said, we stuck Parsons, at least me and James stuck Parsons in there. It's just a matter of positions, basically, because Watt and Parsons and a few other outside linebackers that I have, even though we're talking about edge rushers, we're looking at their total potential ceiling at combined tackles too, because they are outside linebackers. And guys like Myles Garrett, though they might record 60, 70 tackles a year, it's not very often. They're more sack guys, tackle for loss guys, and such. So I'm giving in a balanced format. I'm giving Parsons and Watt the edge over Garrett just based off the position. If Garrett was an outside linebacker, yeah, he was getting those combined tackles that those two were getting. Yeah, I mean, it would be really arguable that he wouldn't be number one, just depending how he performed on the field.
And to James, your point about consistency. So the past 4 seasons, he's been in the league for 5. But the past 4, he's had double-digit sacks, double-digit tackles for a loss in all of them, including 3 seasons ago when he only played in 10 games. So that's great consistency over the past 4 years, which, to your point, it's hard to find that across the defensive line. And when you're having it that high level of production, it's quite impressive and certainly worth of a high pick.
Right. And for people that, for what I was saying about combined tackles, just for example, this past year, Myles Garrett looks like he had 50 tackles, combined tackles, 32 solo, 18 assists. But then you turn around and you look at somebody like TJ Watt, which could have been a top 10 overall IDP producer in your balanced league last year. He had a huge amount. Let's see. He had 45 and 14. Oh, he missed some games, didn't he? Was playing hurt. This year is not a good year to do that, folks. I shouldn't have done that. But his 21 sacks, he still managed to get to after the quarterback. But normally I believe that TJ Watt is up in that 70 area, 60 to 70 combined tackles. Am I correct?
He's had 54, 68, 55, 53, 64. So 50, 60 range, almost pushing 70, but still significantly. I mean, Myles Garrett's highest is 51 this past year, 50, you said. So,
and the stability and that consistency is, of the combined tackles. It's something to take note of between the two players if you're talking about an edge rusher.
All right. Well, we're not going to just go down the list talking one after the other here, because what fun would that be? James, who's someone on this list, yours or someone else's, that you want to talk about and where they landed or didn't land?
Yeah, I'm really big on Harold Landry. He just quietly last year was insanely consistent throughout the weeks. He didn't have any games where he dropped a 5-sack game or 4.5 game where he lit up some terrible Jake Fromm that was out there. He was just consistently getting you your points and not failing and always producing. And that, again, is something that's kind of difficult to find, and also it's easy to predict that going forward because, yeah, sure, next year, is he going to repeat that? Pretty unlikely. But you know what he's likely to do? Not run into games where he's roadblocked and you go, oh, I have to bench him. He's not going to have a good matchup here. He can play through matchups, which when I'm looking at the IDP side of the ball and I'm looking at the front end of my draft picks, I want guys who I'm confident with 100% of the time. And I don't want to go, well, it's week 10. Maybe I slide this guy off my starting roster and I go and play this guy because he has an excellent matchup. When I'm drafting high, I want to take someone who I'm confident in all 16 weeks, even if their gigantic ceiling might not be super high. And I just think Harold Landry is just very quietly within our top 10, very quietly in probably a lot of people's top 10. And no one's really talking him up. And I'm just would like to be one of those people who does. So go get yourself some Harold Landry, another guy who I just think is kind of vastly underrated and you just don't hear enough about.
Yeah, he sort of had a year where he upped his game here this past year, to your point. But even before that, tackle-wise, with the 2 years that he completely started, 68, 69 combined tackles, and he's only missed games in his rookie year. The past 3 years, he hasn't missed a game, which is, to your point about consistency, great to see. Gary, we all have him in about the same range here. How you feeling about Harold Landry this year with some of the question marks that the Titans are going to go into free agency with their linebackers?
Well, I think it's noticeable that as Jeffrey Simmons has grown, Harold Landry's became a little bit more stable. So, I think that I think he stays in Tennessee, and that's what this is based on at the moment. It would really depend on where he would go if I readjusted in that ranking, because I feel that he needs good defensive linemen around him to really succeed. I think that's what we've kind of seen a sample of. But as it is, I like him a lot. I'm not going to shy away from him.
All right. Well, why don't you go ahead, Gary, and pick someone else on one of these lists to go over?
Well, let's see. Let's go with Chase Young, Kraig, because you have him clear up to number 2 right after TJ Watt and above Myles Garrett, where I have him at 9, and we're looking at 4 for James. I guess realistically, I'm going to address this to both of you. I had trouble trusting to put Chase Young in here so high. I mean, it was debatable between Chase Young and Brian Burns of Chase being 9 or 10 at this point. That's a lot of confidence to have them in top 4. What last year doesn't worry you?
It doesn't, because that whole team was a mess across that defensive line. They just continued to have injury after injury. And he is a young enough guy that showed a lot, coming out of college to be drafted where he was. And then in that rookie year, that to me, he has all the tools to be top or the top defensive end. And really, it was just, if we're looking at Dynasty, I know people look at Dynasty windows differently, but Myles Garrett has a good, I think it's like 5-6 years on, which isn't the end of the world. Clearly, I still love Myles Garrett, but I think the ceiling is about the same, and the age difference just put me one up there. But there really isn't much of a difference. They're 1A, 1B for me as far as defensive ends.
All right.
Yeah, for me, I think there's a much larger gap than the 2 to 4 suggests. I've got Watt, Parson, and Garrett all kind of in their own tier. And then I've got Chase kind of leading that next tier of the Bosa brothers and Landry and even Josh Allen and Brian Burns. I like him, but I do have the concern. So I'm kind of falling probably somewhere in the middle of you two, which makes sense because his ranking's in the middle. But that rookie year you can't forget that. And that was recent, and there's a lot to look forward to with it. So when you're thinking in a dynasty perspective, it's really hard to pass on it. At the same time, he played 9 games last season. It's not like he played 4 and then got hurt. He had a good amount of time to produce, and he didn't. And to Craig's point, that defense was in shambles. The offense was kind of a joke, and it was just really a lost season over in Washington. But at the same time, elite guys like Myles Garrett and TJ Watt, they just keep producing. It doesn't really matter what's going on around them. They will produce because they're that good. Now, can Chase Young continue to grow? I think he can, and I think he could easily become one of those guys. But right now, he's not there yet for me. I'm still a little bit further back, but obviously I have plenty of optimism. But I think, honestly, in terms of just our overall feel on him, I'm probably closer to Gary than I am to Kraig, even though the rankings don't necessarily reflect that.
Yeah, my problem fully last year and putting me in doubt now during those 9 contests is I knew that by doing the start-sit formula for our Gridiron Ratings charts that he had some favorable matchups. And I believe a real player that deserves to be up here can do more than just match that matchup's outcome, that they play up to the opponent no matter what. And he wasn't doing it even in the right situation. So that worried me. And again, that's why I have him down at 9. And it was hard for me. I mean, I even have DeMarcus Lawrence up on the list, and it was tempting. But DeMarcus Lawrence, I look at Dynasty a little bit different than some. At 29 years old, I believe he's 29. At 29, this guy can still play for a couple more years, and if I can get 2 to 3 more years out of him in a Dynasty league, and he's an elite or maybe just outside the top 12 type of guy that just gets production, then I'm going to give him his respect and go ahead and go with that. Things have changed a little bit. Look at Aaron Donald. Look at some of these other guys that are just older edge rushers, but they're still dominating in the league now.
Yep, and I agree. If you're talking just pure value over 2 or 3 years, which there's certainly a large portion of people that even playing Dynasty, that's just what they look at, for the next small window of years. When I'm going to be looking at this for drafting people or someone, I am going to just put a higher priority on youth and the people that I think are going to be able to be there for a longer period of time if I want to. And just to sort of wrap up about Chase Young, I think he had said it, even Ron Rivera had said it, and sometimes we lose. We've seen this with, talk about Calvin Ridley and stuff. There's a human aspect to a lot of this stuff with players too. And sometimes these people that are drafted so high put a lot of pressure on themselves and aren't able to produce for whatever reason. I think he was doing that this past year when he started off the year. They said, he trying too hard just to make the big play instead of, playing like you should be and just going out there and taking what they can give you. I think you run into that with some of these young players, and I fully expect Chase Young to bounce back. But if he doesn't, he has another down year or just, mediocre year. Yeah, I mean, he's certainly going to be falling here, coming back from injury.
I completely ditto all that as well. It's hard to, truly evaluate when you're dropping rankings as to, where people are, because like Gary said, there's these guys who are 28, 29, 30, who in a dynasty eyes are, they're a little bit past their prime. We don't know how long they're going to last. And the reality is no, they're still stuck right in their prime. And yeah, they might not last very long, but you can get a lot of value out of that prime. You're just not going to be able to flip it as it ages, which is kind of what a lot of people want to do in dynasty is draft young, get a ton of reward, then flip for a profit. And while that's all nice and good and great in theory, in execution, you want to win your league, so you need to have some of these in-prime guys ready to go. So I agree with Gary's sentiment on DeMarcus Lawrence, but I'm a little bit further back on him. He's going to be 30 next year. He was 29 this past season. He's coming off of an injury, and yes, he already has recovered from that, so to speak, because the first half of his season is what he lost. But he only had 3 sacks last year. 2 of them were against that horrendous Washington team that was just all over the place. And the last one came the last week of the season against Jalen Hurts. And, he's a guy who should be a big play guy and a big play volume guy. And I think I could find his production in the middle of the second round fairly easily or, throughout the season. I don't think he has that really high ceiling left anymore. While he may be consistent, he's not really touching my top 12. He's within my top 24, but that sentiment remains for guys like Hassan Reddick and Shaq Barrett, who Kraig and I both don't have in our top 12s. They're both right outside on mine because they're the kind of guys who just aren't that sexy for whatever reason, but produce. And at a certain point, you have to ignore age and take production instead of just only focusing on age.
Yep. I've never had a player on my roster more than 2 or 3 years. Get tired of looking at them, dynasty or not, right? Will and deal, keep building, keep rotating.
I like trading, but when I find a guy that I like, I'm going to be keeping him unless I can get some sort of a haul. And I don't generally get guys offering me that, especially in leagues with defense. So.
Yeah. And on one hand, that makes sense. On the other hand, if you could have had, Jason Pierre-Paul for the past 10 years, yeah, you might have had some downs, but you probably had a lot of ups and more ups than downs. Yeah. So you can just kind of roll with them when you find those young guys. Now, you also can miss on a lot of them too, but when you find them, it's hard for me to move on.
Yep. You get what you pay for, so sometimes it's best to wait on some of these defensive linemen in rookie drafts, either kind of reach a little bit further down. If you pay that big expensive a first round rookie pick for one, they don't all work out. So I'd rather grab them the next year in a draft and pay what they've earned.
To that point, Gary, and that's kind of why I had Phillips and Rousseau on here, because I wanted to get their names out here, both to different levels and sort of changed throughout the season.
Mhm.
But they both showed me enough that they lived up to that draft capital and just, sort of ooze that potential. They
Mhm.
are very different situations and how they're used. Buffalo has that heavy rotation still going last year, and I expect them to continue some of that. But, Russo's a mountain of a man just that can move in ways that he shouldn't be able to. He didn't put up huge numbers for most of the season, and you probably can,
Mhm.
in some of your leagues, find an owner that's a little frustrated because, in college for a couple of years, he was just the guy. And then,
Mhm.
he sat out and he didn't have great production and go as high as people had hoped in the draft. And then Phillips, it was a tale of two seasons where, he had a slow coming on. And then the end of the year, he really started showing why he was drafted where he was.
Mhm.
And that, top 5 prospect in his high school class, I think. So I like
If
throwing
I
those names on there at the end of it because I do
Yeah.
value them up there. And I do think to some degree, they're probably going to be a little bit cheaper than spending that high draft pick on them at this point.
Oh yeah, and it's perfectly legit there. I mean, Jalen Phillips would probably be at 13 for me. Um, Greg Russo actually, or I'm going to say I said his name wrong probably, but either way, he should have a better opportunity heading into this season. I do believe Hughes and I can't remember
Addison, I
Addison.
think, is the other one.
I
Yeah.
think either one or both are free agents. Both of them are well into their 30s, I believe, too, considering. And I don't know why Greg has not gotten more playing time, more snaps. He's like the third man when it comes to his snaps for the last year or two. I think, unless there was something that I missed this year. So hopefully next year he gets to step in there, and there's no reason to think that he couldn't be. It's all splitting hairs right now.
Yeah,
I like the Max Crosby too. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Jay.
I was just going to say, I'm agreeing on Rousseau. I think there's a lot of, if he takes this next step, those guys are going to leave because they're old as heck. And even if they do return, they're probably not going to be that valuable since they've been around for like a decade plus at this point. So there's lots of opportunity there. He's shown that he isn't trash. So he should be getting all that opportunity, especially with that draft capital.
Mhm.
There's a very clear path to very good production from Greg Rousseau. So I get that. But on the other side, I kind of want to get defensive with Jalen Phillips. Yeah, he had 8.5 sacks, which is a very, very nice total that you can have in a season. And he did have that chunk of production from week 9 to week 13. He picked up 7 of those 8.5 sacks. But if you look a little bit closer at the numbers, he picked those up against Tyrod Taylor, Lamar Jackson, Joe Flacco, Cam Newton, and Mike Glennon. That's playing to your abilities against a bad offensive line as opposed to playing to your abilities and grabbing a sack and a half against Pat Mahomes in one game and going, wow, he looks amazing. I'm a lot more trepidatious on Jalen Phillips because he hasn't really done it against anyone yet. I don't know if he's done anything that made me go, oh, that's better than I expected, which is not exactly what I want. In a top 12 guy. I want that maybe in my 30th overall guy or my 25th overall guy. But this early, I'm not a fan of that. I get why you want to get his name out, and those numbers look nice. But when you look deeper at the numbers, I'm a lot more cautious.
Fair.
What's that?
That's fair. I can't argue that. I just think that he showed, enough progression for me to be thrown up there, and we'll see how it pans out. I think his playing time will improve.
I felt the same way about Max Crosby. I mean, if he could turn those pressure, he gets a huge amount of pressure, but he just doesn't get to the sack and the tackles for loss. I think the sacks more than anything. I struggled with him too. I wanted to put him in. Last year I was really down on him, but he's consistent at getting at the quarterback overall, I believe, but he just isn't following through and padding that box score for us with every. He needs a little bit more of a higher percentage of hitting home, I suppose. I'd like to see him take that next step.
Yeah, no arguments for me. I completely agree on Crosby. in my mind, I'm fantasy drafting them a very high edge rusher early to complement him, and suddenly you've got a problem on the outsides. And suddenly he's not the guy who your defense is focused on, or your offense is focused on blocking and making sure he doesn't get those pressures, even though he still does. I'd love that. At the same time, I'm kind of living in reality, and I feel like that's probably not going to happen. They're probably not going to do that or sign anyone, and it's probably going to be another season of, it could be really good there, but not actually becoming really good. So that's why he's on my outside looking in. I might eat those words in less than a month, but for now, that's kind of how I feel.
I'm astounded by this factor here. Neither one of you have Shaq Barrett even sniffing up in that area, or Hassan Reddick, but at the same time, you have Harold Landry within the ranks. They're all outside linebackers. I'm really wondering how in the world, especially with Reddick and Barrett, they're not on your guys' list, but yet you have Josh Allen, and both of you have him within your top 10. What are you feeling there? I mean, is it just a fact of hoping he can finally hit his hype and stand up? He didn't actually have a really good year, right?
Kraig, I'll let you take the reins on this one because, I have to really think about why I don't have a certain someone on my list right now. So go ahead,
Yeah.
Kraig, take it away.
So to me, Josh Allen, I think, has a higher upside dynasty wise than Reddick and Barrett do. Reddick had 2 good years this past year, one with the Cardinals and then with the Panthers. And to me, it kind of feels like I need to know what team he's going to be on and how they're going to use him, because we saw him early on in his career just not get utilized in that way on the Cardinals. And if he goes to a team that isn't going to use him that he has been the past 2 years, and there's people out there probably thinking, if they're listening to us, well, why would a team do that? Teams do dumb stuff with player personnel in the NFL all the time where we think they utilize them to the best way. So if he were to return to Carolina where he signs a 2 or 3 year deal or something with his age, certainly I think he would be up here somewhere. He'd be in the top 10 anyway. But I really do, for dynasty purposes, want to see where he goes before I'm willing to invest in him at that level. And then Shaq Barrett, it's kind of different where he has proven it, since he went to Tampa Bay, really. But it feels like that team is going in the completely wrong direction, where that offense, I don't think, is going to look very similar with the free agents and Tom Brady no longer being there, and even that defense getting older, the cap issues that they're going to have. Are they going to have the other people there to, take attention away from him? I don't think that's going to happen, and to me, that lowers his upside. Whereas Josh Allen, yeah, he is, like you said, maybe all upside, but so his first year, he had that great rookie year, and we've seen that from a few guys. Second year was that complete mess where he sort of sat out, was hurt, and kind of seemed like maybe he was a head case. But then this past year, even despite all that stuff going on, not only did he up his sacks, he had another decent year with that 7.5. But he also really had a whole heck of a lot of tackles. He had 71, I think it was, this past year, which is showing me progression, that he isn't just going to be a Yannick Ngakoue, who he's just going to be a pure, he's not getting you a sack, he's not going to get you anything. And he was able to do that with this weird Jaguars team. It kind of feels like he's bought into the team, and things should be better for him even this next year, because I do think the Jaguars are going to take a step forward, because really, if they take a step backwards from the mess they had the past year, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that none of us are able to address on this show.
Valid.
Yeah, now that I've had a little bit of time to compose my thoughts, why don't I say exactly what they are, which is, I kind of don't have a good reason for why I'm so high on Harold Landry as I'm not on Hassan Reddick. They're essentially the same guy. Kraig brought up a solid point, which is he's only has 2 years of production, but at the same time, what does Harold Landry really have? It's not that much more. And 2 years is a very long time in the National Football League. So I can't really point to that and go, oh, that's why, and really say that with a straight face. Yes, he's a free agent. Yes, I guess I'm concerned about where he goes, but I should be the same level of concern with Harold Landry, as teams can go and do dumb things with any player. So I really don't have a good answer. Reddick is on my outside looking in, probably around the 13 to 15 range. but I really can't defend that one. Whereas Shaq Barrett, he's going to be 30. He's on that team that is not moving at all anywhere forward. And I really just don't want to touch that, even if he brings me another stellar season or two. It's not worth the squeeze. I don't want to really go there in case I miss. And to Craig's point, Josh Allen has been a tackle machine this past season. And do I expect that necessarily to continue? Not so much, as I think that Jacksonville team will actually get better offensively, which will lead to less rushing attempts going towards Josh Allen late in games. But at the same time, I think that will also increase his big play ability, and I think his sack ability is well known. So I think if that team actually gets good and they're able to have late game pressures on a consistent basis and game script calls for it, I think Josh Allen can move up. Plus, he has youth on his side. So it's less that I feel like I should defend Landry and Allen and more that I just probably underranked Reddick a little bit. Maybe he's really in that 10 to 15 range for me as opposed to 13 to 15. But I really don't think Barrett belongs in the top 12 given the context of everything and the fact that we have free agency inbound, which means there's lots of optimism on guys who can land perfectly or just go back to where they were. And I think eventually, Barrett's probably not going to be really anywhere close to my top dozen when it comes to dynasty perspective, when we're actually hitting draft season.
Well, to defend my question, I suppose the way that I'm looking at Riddick is he has done it for 2 years in a row, and he's done it by pressuring the quarterback. So even if he was to move on, I don't think that there's any doubt that his best value to any NFL team is not putting him at linebacker, where they kept experimenting with him and doing things with him when he was first drafted with the Cardinals. It wasn't until they finally, the Cardinals, right?
It did for 1 year, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Then he was traded, wasn't he?
I think I don't know if he was traded or left as a free agent.
No. Oh, okay. Actually, I got caught up on myself there. He did. They used him oddly for a couple of years when he was drafted by the Cardinals until they finally got him in a position where if I remember the season that he did break out, I think it was because of injuries. He was actually like the third or fourth guy on the totem pole, and he got moved in when Chandler Jones went down, and I'm not sure, maybe Golden. So then all of a sudden he goes off as what he came out of college as. He was more of a pass rusher coming out of college than he was ever an inside linebacker, if I remember right. Don't quote me on his rookie bio. But in the end, I don't think there's any problem thinking that, any NFL team would love to have him coming off the edge, and Carolina will continue to do the same if they give him a nice contract this year. I do think he's earned that contract. When it's come to Shaq Barrett, I think he's still got that 2 to 3 years. I'm not scared about Tom Brady and the changes on the defense. The only thing that I hear is that's going to probably be more playing time for Shaq Barrett and more opportunities for him to pad his combined tackle box. So on top of what his 9 sacks or something that he's probably going to be able to pull off. When it comes to Josh Allen, I'm having a hard time believing in him whatsoever. He got a big, nice boost in combined tackles, but that just the opposite of what I was talking about at Barrett. He was on a porous the Jaguars have a porous offense last past year. He got extra snaps. He got extra opportunities probably if the Jacksonville offense actually improves, it's going to take away a little bit from how much time he might see on the field. I'm looking at MFL, myfantasyleague.com, and I only see 5.5 sacks out of a full-time, supposed to be he's a top 10 rookie guy. He was a top 10 pick, and he's pulled off only 5.5 sacks this past year in his third season. I'm not impressed. He did have 10 tackles for a loss, but so it is some indication maybe he was getting the pressure in there. I'm not confident that they're going to build, the Jaguars are ever going to build a good defensive line to assist him. You need better talent across the whole entire line in a lot of situations for a player to really take advantage and get what he should. I'm not a believer. I'm really down on him this year.
I'm sorry, you were talking about Josh Allen, right?
Yes.
And his, what did you say you had for him for stats this year?
Looking Josh Allen, Jacksonville DE. I'm looking at 5.5 on MFL.
Yeah, I see 7.5 over on Pro Football Reference, and that's my go-to guide. But who knows who's right?
Yeah, NFL.com has him at 7.5 with
Okay.
the same tackles
Well,
for a loss.
I'm not going to get overly excited about 2 extra sacks for a third year first round.
Let me get defensive for one of the first time
There you
Gary.
Go. All right.
That's better than DeMarcus Lawrence has had for the past 3 years in a row.
Yes, but when
And
DeMarcus Lawrence has proven that he can do it, has Josh Allen?
His rookie year was pretty darn close to the 2 good years that DeMarcus Lawrence had. It's not as good, but for a rookie, I mean, DeMarcus Lawrence has 2 good years in his career. I know as a Dallas fan, sandwiched in a whole bunch of not so great stuff. And, those 2 years where he didn't have a whole lot with him on that defensive line, but that's sort of the way Dallas has been doing it lately. I'm going to be really interested to see what he does this next year because, man, I don't think he should be getting big money from anyone coming up here, just the way that he's played the past 3 years.
Interesting. Yeah,
I like the player a lot.
Right?
I like him a lot, but the production just hasn't been there. I think he's always banged up. I don't know that he's missed a whole lot of time besides this past year, which I was really happy when they let him actually just get healthy and set him out as much as they did because I really wish teams would do that more. Well, and honestly, I was talking over some people what I had for rankings before the show here, and people were questioning me about Joey Bosa. We like to talk about how injury prone is a narrative and stuff that doesn't really exist. That, people like to have a talking point. But when I see people that have continually had like head injuries, that is the thing that sort of worries me. And I think the Chargers are somewhat worried about it too, is, even this last year when they thought he might have had a concussion, they passed the protocols and all that, they still left him out of the rest of the game just to be, more safe with him given his history because, man, and I get it, you don't want to mess with someone's head.
Right.
That's more than just the NFL. That's their life and their livelihood. So I still like him a lot. It seems like we all have him in about the same range here. And talent-wise, certainly he's up near the top. But that head stuff, one bad shot, it could happen to anyone, but your head is constantly getting banged around with those guys down there. To me, if you're talking about a type of injury risk that does exist, that's it for me.
Well, like to add anything about Joey Bosa?
Not so much Joey Bosa, but I'd like to pile on in Josh Allen's defense here.
All right.
We didn't have an episode last week, so we need to get as much defense in as possible.
Yep. That's what it's about.
He had 10.5 sacks his rookie year as a 22-year-old. Now, is that necessarily to be expected going forward, especially because he's barely put up that total the past 2 seasons? Not necessarily, but also as a 22-year-old in his rookie season, he had Yannick Ngakoue and Calais Campbell out there actually, being productive as another defensive end and, taking blocks and not being the de facto number 1 guy. And, if you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars draft picks coming up, they've got 4 picks within the top 70. And I would highly, highly, highly venture a guess that one of those is going to be an edge rusher, perhaps even the number 1 overall pick, which I know might sound blasphemous, but also doesn't necessarily happen that way. And suddenly Josh Allen's value could skyrocket forward. Of course, I could be wrong. I'm trying to predict the future, and many of the time, almost all of the time, we're wrong. But I think that there's more progression to be had for Allen based on his circumstance than there is regression, even if that offense does get better and he loses some tackles, because he's going to have more big plays, in my opinion. So I feel very confident that his floor is high, because even if that offense doesn't progress, and they don't draft another defensive end and they stink, well, he still had a pretty dang good season this past season. It wasn't light years better. It wasn't a Shaq Barrett dominating season like he's had the past 3 seasons, but he also has a lot more time to grow into it. So again, from a dynasty perspective, I'm just kind of all about looking at Josh Allen moving forward, whereas Shaq Barrett does feel like he's kind of moving in the wrong direction.
Well, I think the only thing, I've already defended my choice on Josh Allen in this whole getting defensive. So I'm just going to go and talk about Bosa. I got him down at 8. He's slipping. He's kind of lucky that he didn't slip anymore, on top of what you've mentioned, Kraig, about it, the whole situation. But I just completely think that he's physically lost a step. Now his step is still really, really good. It's like some of these edge rushers' best step. Joey Bosa still has it, but with all the injuries and the things that's going on, I just don't think that you know he's got it in the gas tank at the same high octane level that he did before. So he worries me a little bit that he might slip out of this top 10 this year, coming year.
The only guy I don't think we've talked about at all is DeForest Buckner, who is down there at number 10 on your list, James. So have at it about Buckner.
Yeah, Buckner kind of hardly even qualifies as an edge rusher. I think probably in some formats he doesn't actually make it there because he's mostly interior. But at the same time, this is a list of edge rushers, and if he were to qualify, I think that he is a very, very, very solid floor guy. He is not a guy who's going to go and rack up 15 and a half sacks like a Nick Bosa would. But he's also a guy who's not going to get you less than 6. He's done it every season except for his second year when he was playing very much on the interior. And I think with the way Indianapolis is and how not into their defensive edge rushers there are that are currently on their roster, which I know me and Gary have discussed ad nauseum, I think Buckner is just so freaking safe. And, that's kind of my overall theme when drafting is, you can find high upside very late. You can go find guys like Jonathan Greenard who just show up and you don't know who they are. And they suddenly are guys who are very viable and good and, can have those big spikes and those big peaks. Finding safety and making sure that you get value out of your pick is a lot easier said than done. And I like to value safety. I know it's not necessarily the sexiest thing to not just go and rank someone super high because they're young and great. But like Buckner is just so dang consistent and just so not bad. It's kind of you're entering the range of it's not necessarily that these guys are great, but they're not bad at anything. And he's honestly, a poor man's Aaron Donald, and we all don't have Aaron Donald on our list because of retirement concerns and age concerns a little bit and whatnot. But if Donald does go ahead and retire, I can't think of a better interior guy than Buckner, and I just want to give him some play because I think he's really worth it.
Yeah, if he was definitely an edge rusher designated player in any of my leagues, he would have made the top 10 just in stability.
Yep.
So overall, I mean, yeah, him and it's like Aaron Donald's 1A and Buckner's 2A, 2B. It's whatever.
Yeah, they're not both
right. They're kind of duplicates of each other overall. I mean, Aaron Donald's got the advantage with the sacks. Buckner moving into the Colts. I was expecting a little bit more out of him. Not saying that I'm disappointed in what he's had, but last year I don't think he had a top year. But that could soon change with Kwity Paye, I believe, coming up. The second year rookie, he did real well last year. There's still a couple of decent moving parts there. Plus, I believe they took another edge rusher. So any help around last year that was high profile, possibly. But either way, Buckner's as solid as it gets. And if he's a designated defensive edge rusher, then you definitely have to include him for stability alone.
Yeah, I like him a lot and have him in a few leagues. The leagues that do have the edge position, sort of the alternative instead of just a defensive line is the interior linemen, which make up your 3-4 defensive ends and then your defensive tackles. Buckner fell into that in those leagues, and he was a top 6 guy. And I think I don't have a list in front of me off the top of my head, but if you're looking at sort of that defensive tackle position anyway, he'd be a top 3 guy for me. And I think he's in my top 2, but don't quote me on that.
I think it kind of just leaves. I mean, you have Sam Hubbard, him and Trey Hendrickson. I see James has Sam Hubbard at 11. Him and Trey Hendrickson, because of their whole situation, I think they're both really good. I didn't like how Hendrickson got less playing time as the season went on. He did play better on the field, though. So they were right outside my top 12. But I'm curious on Hunter. Myself, what are you thinking there, Kraig? think he's going to come back and get back to the form that he was at a couple of years ago?
Yeah, after the injury scare that he had, he's still quite young, and he had a decent year this past year coming back into that situation where they really had no one else across that defensive line that was any use. Where he ends up, it will be interesting. But again, it's still an upside pick based on what he's shown when he's healthy and had any semblance of a defensive line with him.
Yep.
Yeah, ditto for me. If you prorate his sack rate, he had 6 and 7 games. If you look at that over 17 games, that's really dang good. That's previous Daniil Hunter level good. Almost those 14 and a half that he had in 18 and 19. At the same time, I think he does need to have another piece on the other side. I think maybe he's just not all the way there, but I think I'm probably more bullish than I am optimistic on that ranking. So if you had him higher, like, Kraig does at number 5, I don't necessarily think that that's bad, but I just kind of like other guys better.
I did want to sort of mention here, you guys talked about, or Gary brought up anyway, Hubbard. I do like Hubbard, but we talked about the difference, and this is more of a balance thing. Hubbard is very valuable in leagues that are more tackle heavy, because if you sort of look at the two defensive ends that they have there in Cincinnati, they're really polar opposites. Trey Hendricks in the past 2 years has just been a big play guy. 13 and a half, 14 sacks, but 25, 34 combined tackles. Where Hubbard, throughout his career, 2020, you can kind of throw it out because it's weird, but 6, 8.5, 2, 7.5 sacks, but then 39, 76, 62, and 62 combined tackles. For a defensive end to be having that sort of level of tackling, you love to see, because it just creates a really nice floor for you. So thinking about it, yeah, he probably should have been on my list there at the end, probably over one of those rookies, because I do really like Sam Hubbard. That was a good guy to throw on there towards your end of your list there, James.
Yeah, and it's kind of speaking two different languages when I have Hubbard and Hunter next to each other, because Hunter seems to be more of that high upside guy, and Hubbard's that very consistent guy like a DeForest Buckner. But I do think, looking forward, that Cincinnati team for 2022 is not going to at all feel like the Cincinnati team in 2018 or 2019 or even 2020. So I think that offense is going to be doing some domination, which is going to lead to a lot of pass rushing attempts late in games, because the other team's going to be passing because they are behind. And I think that's going to lead to higher sack opportunities while also keeping Hubbard's tackle rate nice and steady like it has been. So, that tackle rate might dip somewhat, not significantly. He was at, you said, 76, 62, 62. So, maybe he's more in just the 50 to 60 range. But if you get me an extra 4 or 5 sacks, I will gladly do that trade. And even if it doesn't happen and he just remains the same, he's still very worthy of a back half of your top 12 list. So I think, again, he's just a really nice floor guy. It's an overall theme for me. I want guys who have floors that I think are just going to hit no matter what. And I'm not necessarily looking at a guy like Max Crosby, who has a nice ceiling, but his floor is also pretty dang low as well.
And that's going to about do it for us tonight here. I hope you guys got a chance to check out our lists here over at GridironRatings.com's YouTube account. You can see it put up there for the course of this show. If you have any questions, please put them in there in the chat. We do check that throughout the weeks just to see if anyone chimed in and had questions for us. You can find us all on Twitter as well. Gary, the IDP tipster, who's currently not on screen, so hope everything is okay. James is at WhatMoney3000, and I'm at RotoHeat Kraig. So thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you hit that like button. I'm guessing you're already subscribed. There he is. Yes, no? You back with us, Gary?
Yeah. Basically, my computer decided to restart.
I just couldn't handle my Sam Hubbard.
Started watching it happen, and oh well.
That's how much you didn't like it yet, James. It's too much Sam Hubbard talk, and Gary's out for the night.
Oh, I missed it. I'll have to watch it.
Yeah,
we're just saying,
Cincinnati bandwidth just can't handle that. Those Bengal talks.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm right above Cincinnati. I love it. I love it. I love what they've done. I mean, I'm not, a fan per se, but I definitely like seeing teams from Ohio win. So can't always be Ohio State.
No complaints here.
But make sure, again, if you're watching us over on YouTube, thank you. Hit the like button and subscribe. Make sure you have the notifications turned on so you can see Gary whenever he randomly pops up during the week, and then the Tuesday, Thursday shows and all the offensive content. Make sure you head on over to gridironratings.com to get Gary and James's stuff. And, of course, all the other guys that they have there. I think you said the new guy, Brandon, may be jumping on with you soon here.
Yeah, tomorrow we're doing tomorrow we're doing an IDP dime drop at 10 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be covering the Bears defensive squad. Just general talk, probably not so much IDP fantasy football as just general situation scenarios, free agents, whatever might be going on. So should be a good time.
So thank you, everyone. We appreciate you tuning in. Make sure that you check them out on Thursday night when they're going to be, Gary, I don't even know. Is it going to be more of the combine stuff then?
It's rookies, folks. Rookies.
All right. So Thursday night, if you want to be talking rookies, Tuesday nights with us, we're going to be doing more rankings for, mainly dynasty purposes, but we'll throw a redraft in there too, switch up the formats. That way you guys get a variety. But if you have any suggestions on stuff you'd like us to cover for you, hit up on YouTube or Twitter, and we can probably get a list together for you one week here. So Thank you, everyone, and have a great night.